3 days after emergency surgery, still lying in a hospital bed with 2 little kids at home and a husband stuck across the country, I finally reached out for help. The response I got back from my own mother was 4 words: "We're not your babysitters." I read it twice. I put the phone down, and then, very quietly, I made a decision that changed everything. But here's the part nobody talks about. The decision wasn't about anger. It wasn't revenge. It was the moment I finally stopped lying to myself about what our relationship actually was. The surgery came out of nowhere. What started as a dull ache in my stomach became an emergency within hours. Ambulance, operating room, recovery. By the time I was lying in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles, I was exhausted, sore, and completely alone. My husband Jake was in Seattle for work. His flight home wasn't until the weekend. Our kids, Emma, who was 6, and Liam, who was 4, were being watched by our neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez. She was 72 years old, kind as could be, and absolutely not equipped to manage 2 energetic toddlers for multiple days on her own. So I picked up my phone and typed out the most basic message I could think of. "I'm still in the hospital. I need help with the kids for a few days. Nothing dramatic, no guilt trip, just the truth, plain and simple." My mother's reply came back fast. One sentence: "We're not your emergency babysitters." I stared at the screen until it went dark on its own. Then I turned the phone over and looked at the ceiling again. Part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, a misread tone, a joke that landed badly. But my parents didn't joke like that. They never had. They were people who said exactly what they meant and expected the world to adjust around them. There had been a comment at dinner years ago, right after Jake and I had announced we were trying to start a family. My mom had looked across the table and said, "Having children is your choice. Don't expect us to raise them." At the time, I laughed it off. People say things, they don't always mean them. Lying in that hospital bed, I finally understood she had meant every single word. I didn't text my parents back. Instead, I opened a different thread and typed a message to Jake's parents, Tom and Carol. "I'm so sorry to ask this. I had emergency surgery. Jake is still traveling. Is there any chance you could help with the kids for a few days?" I hesitated before hitting send. They lived 40 minutes away. It was a Saturday. It was a lot to ask of anyone. I pressed send anyway. The reply came back in under 2 minutes. "Of course, we're already getting dressed. Send us the address." Something shifted in my chest. A tension I hadn't even fully registered started to loosen. A second message followed almost immediately. "Don't worry about a single thing. We've got the kids." 1 hour later, Carol walked into my hospital room, carrying a paper bag and a bunch of bright yellow flowers. Tom came in right behind her with a stuffed dinosaur and a coloring book tucked under his arm. "We brought reinforcements," Tom said, setting the dinosaur down on the bedside table. Carol placed the flowers on the windowsill and turned to look at me. "The kids are fine. They think it's a slumber party." She smiled and handed me a tissue because apparently I had started crying without noticing. "You just focus on getting better," she said. "Everything else is handled." And I believed her. For the first time since the ambulance ride, I actually believed that things would be okay. There was something my parents didn't know about me yet, something I hadn't told most people. For the past 6 years, I had been sending them $3,000 every single month. It started with a phone call from my dad late one evening. His contracting business had fallen apart after a business partner walked away with the finances. There were debts, medical bills, a mortgage that had suddenly become impossible to manage on their own. My dad sounded defeated in a way I had never heard before, and I did what I had always done. I tried to fix it. Jake and I talked it through together. We had savings. I had a good job. We'll help them get back on their feet, we told each other. Just temporarily. Temporarily lasted 6 years. What started as covering the mortgage slowly expanded. Then it was their health insurance. Then a monthly transfer for groceries and utilities because my dad kept saying they were struggling. Eventually, everything got rolled into a single automated payment that left my account on the first of every month without ceremony or acknowledgement. $3,000. My parents never called it help. They called it support. They said things like, "Your father shouldn't have to worry at his age, and family takes care of each other." And we worked our whole lives. And somewhere along the way, the conversations stopped being conversations. They became expectations, a quiet, polite agreement that this was simply how things were going to be. The stranger part, the part I kept turning over in my mind, was that they never once asked how we were doing financially. Never asked if managing a mortgage, daycare costs, and their monthly expenses was putting pressure on us. Never offered to help with anything in return. Not once. That evening, lying in the hospital bed, while Tom and Carol's flowers sat on the windowsill, catching the last of the day's light, I opened my banking app. The next transfer was scheduled for the following morning. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then I tapped on the payment. Cancel, recurring transfer. The app asked me to confirm. I pressed the button. The screen returned to normal, quiet and unremarkable, as if nothing significant had just happened. I put the phone on the bedside table and slept through the night for the first time since the surgery. The next few days were the opposite of what I expected. Tom and Carol came to the hospital every single day. They brought snacks, updates about the kids, small drawings Emma had made that she wanted me to see. One afternoon, Carol handed me a picture Emma had colored, a family of stick figures all holding hands, each one carefully labeled. Emma, Liam, Grandma Carol, Grandpa Tom. There was a blank space where another figure might have been. Emma had simply left it empty. My parents hadn't been around enough to make it into the drawing. I was discharged on the third day. Jacob managed to catch an earlier flight home, but Tom insisted on picking me up himself. Doctor's orders, he said. No lifting, no stress. When I walked through my front door, the house smelled like chicken soup and fresh bread. Carol had already stocked the refrigerator and left meals labeled with heating instructions. Emma and Liam launched themselves at me the second I stepped inside. That night, after the kids were in bed, Jake and I sat on the couch together. I showed him my mother's message. He read it slowly, then set the phone down and shook his head. Did they at least check on you after? No missed calls, no texts, nothing. Guess not, I said. Jake leaned back on the couch. I'll never understand them. I didn't say anything out loud, but I was already thinking about the transfer that had been due 2 days earlier. $3,000 that hadn't arrived. If my parents checked their accounts, and they always checked their accounts, they had already noticed. The following afternoon, my phone lit up. Dad calling. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention the surgery. The first words out of his mouth were, "Olivia, something happened with the insurance payment." And just like that, I knew exactly why he had finally decided to call. I told him I'd cancelled it. There was silence, then a short, confused laugh. What do you mean, cancelled it? I said I stopped the payments. Another silence, longer this time. Why would you do that? I looked at the tea going cold in my mug. I was in the hospital. Yes, your mother mentioned something about that. Mentioned something. That was how my emergency surgery had been categorized. A footnote, a mention. I told him I had asked for help with the kids. He said they were busy. I pointed out that the insurance payments apparently weren't complicated, but helping with their grandchildren for 3 days was. He told me I needed to restart the payment that day. No, please. No, can we talk about this? Just an instruction delivered flatly, like a bill coming due. That was the moment I understood something I should have seen years earlier. They weren't calling because they had finally thought about what happened. They were calling because the money had stopped. And for the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel guilty about it. I'll think about it, I said. Then I hung up. My mother called. Less than a minute later, she skipped any greeting entirely. Your father says you stopped the insurance. I confirmed that I had. You can't do that, Olivia. Her tone was the kind you use when someone has left dishes in the sink. Not the tone you use when your daughter just had emergency surgery and called you from a hospital bed. I waited to see if she'd ask anything else. She didn't. You heard I was in the hospital? Your father mentioned it. I had emergency surgery. My appendix ruptured. Well, you're home now, aren't you? I looked around my kitchen. Jake was upstairs getting the kids ready for bed. There was another container of soup on the counter that Carol had dropped off that afternoon, and my mother was waiting for me to agree to restart the payments. I told her I wouldn't be doing that. She asked me why I was doing this to them. I said, because when I was lying in a hospital bed after surgery, the only thing you told me was that you weren't my babysitter. I said it kind of was. Her voice sharpened. We raised you for 18 years. You owe us support. That sentence sat there between us, heavy and strange. I don't owe you $3,000 a month, I said. The silence that followed felt different from the others. Then she announced, not asked, announced, that she and my father would be coming over that weekend to discuss it properly. We'll see, I said, and I ended the call. They showed up Saturday evening like nothing had happened. My mom walked in with a bottle of wine. My dad followed behind her, looking around the house the way someone does when they're deciding what to say about it. Nice to see you're up and moving, he said. That was the closest he came to asking about the surgery. The dinner had actually been Tom and Carol's idea. When I mentioned my parents wanted to talk, they suggested it might go more smoothly if everyone sat down together. So the table was full. Jake and me, Tom and Carol, my parents. Emma and Liam had eaten earlier and were upstairs watching a movie. For a while, everything felt artificially polite. Carol asked about my recovery. Tom asked Jake about work. Jake asked my dad about his golf schedule. My parents played along like this was a completely ordinary evening, like the past 2 weeks hadn't happened at all. Then my mother turned to Carol and said, "Thank you so much for helping Olivia while she was in the hospital. We were so worried about her." I put my fork down slowly. Tom nodded politely. My dad added, "Family has to step up in situations like that." And then my mother said it. We were calling her every day to make sure she was okay. Something broke loose inside me. I had spent the entire evening trying to stay calm. I had told myself to keep it together, stay reasonable, don't make it a scene. But hearing that lie spoken out loud at my own table, in front of the people who had actually been there, I couldn't let it stand. "No, you weren't." My mother looked at me. "What? You didn't call every day?" She laughed a little, the way she always did when she wanted something to seem like a misunderstanding. "Olivia, you must be confused." "I'm not confused." My dad cleared his throat. "Maybe we missed a day or two. You didn't call once." Nobody spoke. Tom and Carol sat very still. Jake looked at his plate. My mother shook her head like I was being dramatic. "That's not the point right now, Olivia. What matters is fixing the insurance situation." And there it was, the real reason they had come. I stood up. I looked at Tom and Carol and I said it plainly, that they had taken the kids the same night I went to the hospital, that they had visited me every day, that Carol had cooked meals and Tom had picked me up from the hospital, and they had done all of it without hesitation and without asking for anything in return. Then I turned to my parents. You didn't come once. We were giving you space. No, I said, you weren't. My dad leaned forward. We came here to fix a financial misunderstanding. Jake made a quiet sound beside me that wasn't quite a laugh. I looked at my parents one more time and said the thing I had been building toward for 6 years. I'm not restarting the payments, the insurance, the transfers, all of it. It's done. My mom stared at me. You can't just cut us off. I can. My dad tried once more. We rely on that money, Olivia. I know you do. Then why would you stop? Because when I asked for 3 days of help with my children, you told me you weren't my babysitters. You're holding on to one message. That message told me everything I needed to know. My dad stood up. So that's it. You're abandoning your parents. I almost smiled at the word. I asked for 3 days of help. You'll regret this. Maybe she expected me to panic. Maybe she thought the threat would land. Instead, I walked to the front door and opened it. If the only reason you come here is the money, I said, then there's no reason to come at all. They stood there for a moment. Then they left. The door closed. The house was quiet. Tom said softly, You didn't have to do that for us. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for myself. Jake put his hand on my shoulder. Upstairs, Liam was laughing at something in whatever movie they were watching. Life kept moving. It always does. In the weeks that followed, my parents tried everything. Phone calls, texts, long voicemails about duty and family loyalty. Eventually, the calls tapered off and then stopped altogether. The insurance stayed cancelled. The transfer stayed gone. And for the first time in years, I watched my bank account move in the right direction. But the financial part wasn't actually the biggest change. The biggest change was quieter than that. It was a realization I came to slowly, in small moments, watching Tom and Carol show up to Emma's school play, watching Liam run toward his grandfather at a soccer game, watching my kids grow up surrounded by people who chose to be there. My parents never came back. But here's the thing. My kids never asked why. Not once. Because children understand something that adults sometimes forget. They understand the difference between people who are present and people who simply occupy a role. And the people who showed up for my family, who drove 40 minutes in the middle of the night, who brought yellow flowers to a hospital room, who labeled meals in the refrigerator and colored in the blank space of a family portrait. Those people were family in every way. That actually counted. Sometimes the people who gave you life are not the ones who stand beside you when your life falls apart. Sometimes the family that chooses you is the one that matters most. And once you understand the difference, once you really see it, you cannot go back to pretending you don't.